Cricket is my passion and I cannot avoid it.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Cricket Unplugged. Today we have a very special guest. He has been an Australian physiotherapist for 27 years. He has worked with the Indian team, the Bangladesh national team, also has been associated with the Rajasthan Royals team since the inception of IPL. Let us all welcome John Gloster. Hello John, how are you doing?
Thanks very much, Anis. But you left out a couple of very important things there. One being my involvement with the T10, which is in the UAE, which is very close to my heart, and is one of the most enjoyable tournaments I've ever been associated with. So, yeah. And look, there's so many other sports that I've also been involved with outside of cricket that that has allowed me to sort of be better at what I am in cricket. So, but that's another story. But yeah, thanks so much. And it's wonderful to be here. And it's wonderful to be talking to somebody who knows cricket, not just from the outside, but from the inside as well. And also somebody who has a genuine desire to see the game move forward, irrespective of geography and irrespective of format. So yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity to be here.
I will be definitely talking about your association with T10 and other sports, but I wanted to keep some for my questions.
Sure.
All right. So let me ask you, how's it been in Mumbai in the last 3 months for you?
It's actually been very interesting, and I'm looking at it not from just the perspective of me, John Gloster, a physio sitting at home in Mumbai, but I'm also having to look at it from the perspective of our athletes. As you know, I'm involved, intimately with Rajasthan Royals, so we're trying to monitor international cricketers. I'm also head of sports science and sports medicine for the Go Sports Foundation, which looks after a lot of Indian Olympians and Paralympians. So we're having to manage and give strategies to manage not just myself during this period, but also our athletes. So one of the things I've been focusing on is practicing what I preach, and really getting down to focusing on fitness, and working out what strategies work for me, and therefore what strategies can work for some of our athletes and our cricketers as well, given the constraints that we're all in. And most of those constraints are physical, particularly in India, because of the lockdown and because of the sort of size of the apartments and spaces that people have to work within here. So it's been something that I've been really challenged by, but on the other hand, become very enlightened. And it's amazing what you can do when you put your mind to it, and how creative we can be around exercise, around boosting our immunity, around looking at nutrition, but also around the mental health and the mental aspect of our games as well. And there's so many things that I've learned, and our players are now learning from a strategy perspective from this experience of COVID-19 that they're going to take into the post-COVID world and into their sporting world that's going to significantly benefit them. So yes, it's been a great learning experience for me, but I'm now able to take a lot of those learnings and give them back to our athletes and the general population to ensure that they are better people and better functioning and performing athletes in their chosen sport post-COVID also.
Wonderful, John. So viewers, we have a personality by the name of John Gloster with us, who's going to be with us for the next half hour. And I'm sure you got to learn a lot from him. So please make yourself sure that you hear the episode completely. John, so for my first question to you, 27 years of experience with elite athletes, an international sports person. How has been the journey so far?
It's been fascinating because so much has changed, particularly in the sports science, sports medicine world, in the last 27 years. When I first entered it in the early 90s, we sort of, it was really uncharted territory. We didn't collect data. We didn't have the ability to collect data. So we didn't really understand our athletes or our cricketers that well back then. So we sort of flew by the seat of our pants a little bit. There was a lot of trial and error involved, but again, there were some great practices, and some best practices have grown and been built out of those experiences. So for me, my initial early experiences at the Australian Institute of Sport in Australia were incredible, working with that level of athletes. And then my move to England in the mid-late 90s to work exclusively with cricket was probably the biggest stepping stone for me, because I stepped into a dressing room at Surrey in the late 90s which effectively was probably the most talented dressing room in the world at the time. Every single person in that first 11 were international cricketers. Your Thorpes, your Stewarts, Butchers, Hollyoaks, Tudors, Bicknell, Thacklane, unbelievable squad. So it was a point where I suddenly realized that it's not so much about managing the physical side of this. It was also about managing very big personalities and ensuring that that dressing room environment functioned efficiently and effectively in order for them to all express themselves physically on the field. So that was an amazing experience for me. We were very successful, yes. So I didn't really experience a lot of sort of the downsides of performance in cricket during that period, but it did expose me to the world of international cricket because of that dressing room. And it was a natural stepping stone, therefore, for me to then move to Bangladesh when they were given their test status. And that opportunity was incredible from a learning experience for me, because it gave me an insight into a system that was yet to develop or blossom. And for me to have some direction in how that was formed was wonderful. And then the transition into India in the early 2000s for me was wonderful. But boy, sports physio, sports medicine, the changes have been incredible over the last 27 years, but probably more so for me in the last 12 to 15 years because of things like the IPL. The IPL and the introduction of the IPL to Indian cricket has changed the face of cricket worldwide, but it's also changed the ecosystem around our sport of cricket as well. And that's been the biggest change that I've seen, is how these athletes are prepared and supported from the outside. So that's been the biggest change that I've seen over particularly the last 15 years.
Well said, John. Now you said you moved to India, but before that, I believe you were associated with the Indian team from 2004 to 2008. How was that journey?
Yes. Yeah, like I said, there was a stepping stone for me from Bangladesh. I had 4 years in Bangladesh cricket. So the transition from England to Bangladesh was much harder for me than the transition from Bangladesh to India, because culturally I was more aligned, having spent those 4 years in the subcontinent already. So it was an amazing experience, because again, I was stepping into a dressing room that was full of superstars and some of the biggest names in world cricket at the time. Lakshman, Tendulkars, Dravid, Gangulis, Sehwags, it was unbelievable. Harbhajan, Zahir. So again, fortunately for me, I'd had experience about managing large personalities in a very successful team. And then it was about changing the mindset of not just Indian cricket, but probably India, or attempting to change the mindset of Indian sports people in general. And hopefully with that, I was attempting to change the mindset of India in embracing fitness, embracing wellness, and understanding that if you want to perform consistently on the big stage, then you can't just be a technically driven athlete or a technically driven player. At some point, you've got to combine the physical with the technical. And if you can do that effectively and efficiently, then you're going to be a very consistent side. And I think it's no coincidence that since India has embraced, or Indian cricket has embraced the concept of physicality and fitness, that they've now become the most successful team in the world across all formats. Because I've never doubted that the subcontinent players are technically the best players in the world. I don't think anyone would argue that. Where they did lack, and we saw an opportunity to change and grow, was in the physical side of their game. And I consistently tell the story around, Indian hockey, and India dominated world hockey for 50 years, won gold medals at Olympics, World Championships, every single thing. And then suddenly something changed, and they were never seen again on the medal podium. And that thing that changed was the reliance on fitness. When hockey moved from a purely technical sport on grass and moved to AstroTurf, then the other teams could compete, because it was so fast and so more physical. And so when you give an athlete what I say the greatest gift of all, which is time, a time and space to execute their skill, particularly in a team sport like hockey, then you're going to, then those athletes are going to come to the fore. So what they gave the Australians and the South Africans and those guys was they weren't as technically gifted, but what they had was pace, and fitness. So they were able to therefore generate space between them and the opposition, and therefore had more time to execute skill. And so those teams came to the fore on the back of fitness, and the Indian team fell away because of that. So I felt that if we could combine the two and get a team that we had in those early mid-2000s to then embrace fitness, they were going to be invincible. And we saw flashes of that coming through, and now we're seeing that more consistently.
During your tenure, I believe you had 4 captains which you had seen. Could you tell us about them, all the 4?
What a fascinating period. Like I said, that period, sort of 2004, end 2004 to 2008, was interesting because I went in with Saurav, and I think Saurav, Indian cricket needs to thank Saurav for what he brought to the game. He brought a different mindset around how to challenge the game and take it head on. So I think Indian cricket owes Saurav Ganguly a large debt of gratitude around the way to approach world cricket and the changing mindsets around world cricket. Then after that, we had Rahul Dravid very successfully. People don't equate Rahul with much success with that Indian team because it was quite a short tenure, but we had wins in England, we had wins in South Africa, and we had wins in the West Indies on turf that we very rarely won in. And I think Rahul and the way his demeanor and his, Rahul as an ambassador, what he brought to the Indian team showed that, yes, we needed that aggressive nature, but we also need to present ourselves as ambassadors for the sport and ambassadors for India. And he did that beautifully. And he also showed that there's a place for gentlemen in this game still, in the modern game. After that, Anil took over. And Anil, very similar to Rahul, there's a different side to Anil on the field than there is off the field. Anil's so focused, so driven, so committed, and in a way quite aggressive on the field, which was why he was so successful. But he had the relationships with the players off the field, which was wonderful to see. And then, who can doubt the skill, the prowess, and the sort of intuition, if you want to call it that, of someone like an MS Dhoni. So I was fortunate to have the first part of MS Dhoni. We won a World Cup under MS, and that was an incredible experience. So I think if we could get a little piece of every one of those 4 captains and put it into one captain, you'd have the greatest captain of all time. But, they all brought something to the table that benefited Indian cricket going forward. But if you wanted to look at perhaps the most complete captain that India's had during that period, then I think you probably couldn't go past MS because he learned from the previous 3 and took sort of the special pieces of those previous 3 captains and brought it into his own captaincy. So therefore he had the advantage of learning from them and embracing that, but bringing his own flavor to the fore as well. And we saw that in the successes that MS had, both on and off the field.
Very rightly said that MS had the advantage of learning from the other 3 captains. Now, you already mentioned about the first success in the T20 World Cup India had in 2007. And I remember a couple of players had injuries. It was Virendra Sehwag, Yuvraj Singh. So what was that magic that John Gloster did that these guys could go on and play the tournament?
Look, I think we'll take a step back and look at that year as a whole. We lost quite badly in the West Indies in the 2007 World Cup, 50-over World Cup. So I think we sort of believed that we had nothing to lose. We didn't have to prove ourselves to anybody. We had nothing to lose effectively. And if you look at the context of when that was played, we'd left a tour of England after 3 months in England and went straight to South Africa from England. So many of those senior players, Lakshman, Tendulkar, Dravid, Kumble, virtually that whole side, the senior side, all said that they were going to sit out the T20 World Cup and go back to India. So going on that airplane to South Africa from England was a very small squad actually, because the others met us in South Africa. The majority of the team met us in South Africa, and it was a very young squad, and led by a new captain, MS Dhoni. And so one of the things I do remember was MS said, "Look, nobody really knows much about this game. We're going to have to learn as we go along. There is one ingredient that we can bring to this game, and that's fun, and we're going to enjoy it. We've got a great bunch of guys, and we're going to enjoy this." And I've only just realized this recently, and I do talk about this often, is that when you bring fun to the center of the equation, you push fear to the periphery. And when you take fear out of the equation, you've got fear is the limiting factor for most people in performance. So if you can take fear out of the equation, then the sky is the limit effectively. And I think that's what happened. I don't think it was any special ingredient from any particular person. Yes, there were some injuries that we managed and we had to, get guys on and off the field. But that's part and parcel of every cricket game and every cricket tournament. You've got to bring something that to the entire group that makes that group successful. And I reckon, looking back at it now, that was the key ingredient. It was fun, and fun and fear don't mix. But if fun dominates, then fear goes away. And I think that's probably the main reason why we were successful in the 2007 T20 World Cup.
So what you are saying is that the Indian team of 2007, which went on to win the T20 World Cup, played with a lot of fun and forgot the fear and left it behind.
Yep. And just let themselves, this is a bit of a cliche, but, just allow them to express themselves. But you can't express yourself in an environment that doesn't allow that. So you have to create that environment that allows people to express themselves, to be themselves. And like I said, to let fun come to the forefront. For me, that's the key. And that was visible very visible and tangible in that tournament. And look, we didn't win every game. We lost a couple of very important. We lost against New Zealand, I think it was, and we lost against
just one game to
someone else. New Zealand it was, yeah. And I remember thinking after that, well, this is going to happen in a tournament like this. But everyone said, no, we'll just, it's still unknown territory for the majority of us. They're learning as much as we are. Nobody had played this tournament before. So we're all in it together in terms of learning. And I just think we learned quicker than the others. We adapted quicker than the others. The story around, that bowl out against Pakistan in that tied match. I remember speaking to their coach during that. And when they came to do the bowl out, they said, what bowl out? There were many people that didn't even know that if in the eventuality of that happening, there would be a bowler. We knew that and we'd practiced that. And that's why when the people who bowled during that bowl out, people were saying, why are they bowling? They're not frontline bowlers. Well, they're the guys, when we practice the scenarios, who hit the stumps more often than anybody else. So we were prepared from that perspective. But again, we also knew that there was going to be a lot of trial and error to this. But on the other hand, we also enjoyed it.
So you had mentioned earlier that Dhoni had the advantage of, learning from the other three captains. But this was Dhoni's first stint as a captain, where he was given a young side to lead. So what was that thing Dhoni had in him, which made the boys play fearlessly and play with a lot of fun?
I think it was the messaging, and it was the messaging from MS about that, taking that side of the game to the fore and being allowed to do that. And I think because he was a young captain, he was similar age to most of those young boys, so he could get them on an age level as well as an experience level. And he's a thinker, MS. He absorbs things, and he's one of these guys who picks up very, very quickly on environments and what's working and what's not working. And so I think he learned from the previous dressing rooms about what worked and what didn't work. He was lucky to have had the experience of, obviously that Indian dressing room in the Australia series. Which series was it?
England.
Where did we win? It's South Africa.
Yeah.
South Africa. And he also had the experience of winning in the West Indies and England. So he'd had these experiences from previous dressing rooms that he was able to bring to the fore. And I think he realized that when we were having the most fun and we were the most relaxed was when we were the most successful. So maybe it was that, but also just the fact that Dhoni believes that everybody has or should have the opportunity to just be themselves. And if you allow that to happen, then only the best can come out of that situation. So I think that, there's a combination of things, but like I said before, everybody was on the same boat. Not as if anybody had played a lot of this form of the game before. And if there's one thing MS Dhoni is very good at, he's very quick at the uptake. He's very quick on learning things. and he's very quick on realizing what works and what doesn't work. And I mean quick in the sense of ball by ball, but also quick in the whole context of the tournament about what's going to work and what's not going to work. So I think strategically, he was ahead of everybody else. And tactically, I think he was just a little quicker off the mark than the other captains and the other teams that were there at that time.
So from Surrey to Bangladesh, Indian national team, and that is where the franchise cricket started.
Yeah.
So your first franchise association was Rajasthan Royals?
Correct. Yeah.
Tell us about your association, because you have been there with them from 2008 till now. There must be something in John that they have retained John for such a long period.
Look, I think one of the things is because I live in India. And so I'm the only one of the international support staff who is here 24/7, 365 days of the year. So it means that there's a constant for the players. So there's a constant source for them to access, particularly, you got to remember for a player, particularly a domestic player, their biggest fear is injury. And the biggest fear is not understanding an injury or getting a correct diagnosis and treatment for an injury. So having a focal point for your biggest fear is very important to a player. So I think that helps. I think it helps that, you know, I've been fortunate to be with a franchise that allows me to sort of bring new innovations to the fore and keep pushing the boundaries around sports science, sports medicine, and best practices. So I think they appreciate the fact that I can bring that to the table for them. I think also they realize that they benefit from me because I have such great association with other leagues around the world. And so I can bring that knowledge back to the table. And that's on players, that's on management, that's on strategy, that's also on the whole sort of ecosystem of support for players, dressing room management, all those sorts of things are valuable. So I think there's value there. And just the fact that, like I said, I'm based in India, and I think to be successful in India, you've got to understand India, you've got to understand the culture, you've got to understand the variations between the north and south, the east, the west, the way people think, and be integrated at some level in that culture. So for me, I think that's probably part of my recipe for success. And also because I'm always pushing the boundaries of knowledge, and I think we all need to be doing that. I'm big on research and science and sort of expanding my mindset and my knowledge base as much as possible. And wherever I can do that, I bring it to the fore for the franchise.
So you mentioned that because you were in India, you had that advantage. Now, we want to know, when did you meet your wife, and where did you meet, and how did that love affair go on?
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. As you said, you know, I'm married to a Gujarati Indian girl. I have a son, 10-year-old, born and brought up in Bombay. So she's a pilot, and she was actually operating the flight with the England-India series 2006, I think it was. She was actually operating the flight. And I briefly met her just prior to that, but she recognized me and said, look, if in those days, the captain could invite you to the cockpit. So she said, look, you know, if you want to come up to the cockpit for the takeoff or the landing or whatever, just let the stewards know and come on up. So, and I've always loved flying, and even though it scares the living daylights out of me, I've always been fascinated by flight. And the opportunity to come and sit in the cockpit of a commercial airline, it doesn't, you know, it was rare in those days, but even rarer now, as you know. But so I didn't miss that opportunity, and yeah, so it just went from there. So obviously she wasn't very cricket orientated at the time. I think she was introduced to Greg Chappell and didn't know who Greg was. And then he was coach. And then she said, oh, look, you know, did you ever play cricket? You know, so there were always got those sorts of questions, and because she just didn't know cricket, but she certainly knows cricket now, I can tell you. But yeah, so I've been fortunate, like I said, to be integrated culturally as well. So I understand the nuances of nutrition and diet and, you know, all the things that become important to India and Indians, and managing high profile players in this country. You've got to think about all these things.
So 15 years in India, mainly in Mumbai. How has been that going for you in Mumbai, especially?
Yes, there's one city that's changed a lot in the last 15 years. You'd have to say it's Bombay, and you'll know that, having, you know, been a frequent visitor here as well. And I think you just got to look at billboards. I think billboards tell you a lot about a city. And I remember when I first came here, you'd see a billboard and it might be a might be a Titan watch or a, Tata car or something. Whereas now you look at the billboards and it's a Rolex and it's a Jaguar and it's, so there's a very different sort of middle class emergence in Bombay. And you see that at every level in terms of spend, but you also see that in sport. And I think we've seen that in the rise of the IPL and the success of the IPL, but also in how that's filtered back down into appreciating that in order for these sports to survive, we need a very strong, robust ecosystem to support it. So fortunately, there's been along with that growth of the middle class, I think we've also seen a growth and an understanding of what Indian sport as a whole, not just cricket, requires to go to the next level. And so we're now seeing more and more funding going into support services through the federations to support our athletes and different sports. And now even more that I'm sort of been involved in the sports education sector here in India, I'm understanding that we've got to penetrate even lower than that and really get focused on our kids, and not just for our sporting outcomes really, but to get a better outcome for our kids overall from a health, wellness and fitness perspective. So there's been a big push by the current new sports minister, Mr. Rijiju, who's now saying that, sports education is now going to be compulsory in the curriculums in India, which is fantastic. It's no longer going to be an extracurricular thing. So, there are positive changes, and that's, reflected in what we see when we look around Bombay and more people being active, running, jogging. There's a bigger focus and emphasis now on fitness and health. And I think that's filtered down from things like IPL and this big interest in sport and health, and, which I'm trying to propagate as we move forward, but use this vehicle of cricket and my knowledge from cricket to sort of help with that, to help with that expansion.
So after Rajasthan Royals, which was your your next franchise team which you worked with?
Obviously after Rajasthan Royals took a little break for 2 years in 2016-17, and as the MCL came to the fore, and I was very fortunate to be selected by yourself to come and be involved over there, and it gave me an insight into the fact that there was a form of the game that was flourishing. Well, this format of the game was flourishing elsewhere, and I realized that this exposure to all these other players and this opportunity for all these other players to be exposed themselves in different sort of franchise-based formats around the world was actually a very good thing. And so I was very keen to be involved because I want to encourage it, and I wanted to see that sort of to go forward as well. So that was a great experience. And the fact that it was in the Middle East and playing cricket in the Middle East is something special as well. There's something very special about, Dubai and Abu Dhabi and, playing on these legendary grounds like Sharjah themselves. And the players love it as well. Who doesn't want to be in the Middle East playing cricket? So that was a great opportunity. And then born out of that was the T10. And I was very fortunate to be involved again through the wonderful association with the Danube Group and the Delhi Bulls, previously the Bengal team, that we sort of had people around us that appreciated that this game could survive anywhere and do well anywhere. If you get the right people in place and the right players, people will come and watch this form of the game. So I just love being involved in all these franchise-based games. And then on the back of that, I, again, in the Middle East, was fortunate to be involved with the PSL, which was also a very interesting tournament and had some incredibly gifted players from all over the world representing that in the Middle East also. So, I'm very happy and keen to support and be involved in some of these franchise-based cricket formats, because I believe they are helping the game and the player to grow and to continue this, growth of our sport globally.
So what's your definition of a good franchise team?
Yeah, we talked that ingredient I mentioned before was fun and the ability to, because an environment's got to be comfortable, because you have a very limited time frame to get players adjusted to the franchise as well as to the other players in the team, given the short lead-in times to these tournaments. So you need to create an environment that is open, that has open communication, that is fun and is engaging for the player. So people say, oh, it's the money, but actually it's not always the money for most of these players. They want to be in an environment that they can be themselves, and be in an environment where they can express themselves and be successful. Because these are the launch pads. You've got to remember that these formats are the launch pads for these players as well. So if they can succeed, you provide a successful environment for them and they can succeed, then they're visible globally. So they want to be exposed, and they want to be exposed to the best, not just the best formats, but the best quality of cricket around. So best quality cricket, best dressing room environments, fun, and also creating an environment around them where they can be themselves. I think if you can get that together with a good support structure, then I think you're on a winning formulation.
I remember you telling me when you had associated with us during the Masters Champions League, I asked you that how do you create a good atmosphere or a good franchise? And at that time, you had told me clearly that you create an atmosphere where you do everything right about the basic running of the franchise and let the boys
Absolutely.
take care of the playing.
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, you just have to provide the environment for them to be themselves. So, you don't want them hunting around last minute to find a SIM card or be comfortable in a hotel room or be able to get a taxi from the airport. Just simple things. And it sometimes is only the simple things that these players need or want. So if they're provided with those amazing, hotels and lovely facilities, then they take away from that experience, whether you won or lost the tournament, doesn't matter. They'll go away from that experience and say, gee, those guys looked after me well. And that's why they come back next time. It's not always, yes, they want to experience good cricket. And they want the quality of cricket. And they want, to be exposed at that level. That's the cricket side. But you can have all that, but have a very bad experience from the franchise, the running of it, the hotels, all the little simple things. It's often that's what comes to the fore for them when they're thinking about that tournament afterwards or telling their friends about it. And I know that, having been involved with the T10, that every single player that I've interacted with since that tournament all talk about the running of it, the franchise, the facilities, and the little things, the personal things that come to the fore. Just little things like the little gift baskets and appreciation of being, genuine appreciation of them being there and a desire for them, to feel at home. And that really matters to a cricketer, because you've got to remember at the end of the day, most of these guys are on the road 9-10 months of the year. So if it's a poor experience for them, they're not going to come back. And it can be a poor cricket experience, or it can be a poor sort of living experience around the cricket. But if you can provide those other things for them, then you've got the complete package. And that's what a lot of players look at these days. And fortunately, in somewhere like the Middle East, there's an opportunity to showcase a wonderful location and a wonderful opportunity to enjoy their time outside of the cricket as well. Because if you can bring the fun ingredient from the field, from outside the field onto the field, then again, that's part of that winning formula.
Right, John. Wanted to ask a very important question for all these youngsters and other people who are coming into cricket. What do you carry in your cricket bag, rather your kit bag, not your cricket bag, your kit bag, which gets the players or keeps the players up and running? Could you show us a few things?
Yeah, sure. Look, it's really interesting because if anything, the size of my kit bag's probably reduced over the years. I remember when we used to travel in the 90s and early 2000s, the physio kit was huge. But that's probably because you were also physio, you were a trainer, you were everything in those days. You had to carry all that equipment as well. So now we have, 2 S&Cs, we have a bowling coach, we have this. So they tend to carry all the larger, heavier stuff. So really what you'll find in my physio kit these days, and more physio is done with your hands, really, these days. So the physio kits tend to get smaller. I often get worried when I see enormous physio kits, because it means they got more and more electrical equipment in there, which means they rely less and less on their hands and their skill. So the smaller the kit, I always say, is if you're doing due diligence on a physio, often it's the smaller the kit, the better it is. But if you can see behind me, I've actually got my that's my travel kit here. And this, believe it or not, is my run-on kit that I have with me on match day. And if you flip this little thing open, it just unfolds. And inside there, what I see is, the really key sort of essentials, which is tape, some scissors, some spray, some basic first aid medical device. But the majority of things in here will be things that are there to quickly tape up someone, a finger or something, to fix a wound, an open wound. So there's basic first aid supply in there. There'll be gloves, there'll be padding. So we always keep, various padding for blisters, gel cushioning, things like that. So what I don't want to happen is I don't want to take a player, if I can avoid it, off the field. Because when you take a player off the field, you're changing the flow of the game for the captain. Because then a 12th man has got to come on, who's cold, he's not aware of the flow of the game. So you can, and so often happens that when a 12th man or someone comes on, the game does change. So we try not to take somebody off the field if we can avoid it. So whatever I can do, I try and do it on the field as quickly as possible. So most of what I need will be in this little packet here. If it's a larger issue and it needs more intense treatment, then obviously the big kit behind me will have everything, all the medications, all the extra strapping, bracing, tapes, and all the various ointments and lotions and things. So, but like I said, believe it or not, our sort of bags have got smaller and smaller, but the trainers' bags seem to have got bigger and bigger because they're now dealing with things like the Catapult GPS systems, which are our tracking systems. So they have to carry all that. Yes, I do all the data monitoring, but in terms of carrying all that, obviously the S&C guys will now carry that. They carry all the resistant bands and TheraBands and medicine balls and Swiss balls and all the rehab equipment. So they tend to carry all that. And my bag tends to really just be the essential medical supplies. In the early days also, because medical equipment, particularly tapes, were very, very hard to come by in India and the subcontinent. So I would have to purchase them overseas and bring everything with me. So again, I had to have enough tape and supplies for the whole tournament. Whereas now you can get them, in India, you can just bring them up and order them a couple of days later, they come. So again, there's no need for the big sort of big supplies these days. And then it really just comes down to things like specific hydration sort of protocols that a lot of the players have that we carry with us. But mostly those will again be in the S&C in his bag and not mine, fortunately. So mine's getting smaller, theirs is getting bigger, and we're all getting more efficient.
So you mentioned it's your hands which does all the magic. So all youngsters who want to get into or rather become a physiotherapist got to take some tuitions or classes from John, which I'm sure he's doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, look, I think you're right. And I think, what makes a good sports physio? Well, I think experience is one. And experience not just off the field, but on the field if you can get it. So volunteer for anything you can that's sporting. And just have an open mindset to change. In the medical community, things are changing all the time. It's a very dynamic field. You have to be open to change. Techniques that you used 2 years ago may not be relevant today. So you've got to keep up to date with the research, the science. And there's some very, fast moving changes, particularly in the areas of nutrition and recovery and all the protocols around that. So we're having to constantly be updated on that and bring the best practices eventually to the player, because ultimately that's what you're there for. And the more then the more you can help that player. So really, you just have to keep saying to yourself, what is the best possible thing for this player at this point in time? Keep asking yourself that question. That's probably the most important thing.
Okay, now with the anti-doping system, practiced by the ICC, we still have some players doing mistakes here and there unintentionally. Like we had recently a case of Prithvi Shaw. Then I remember about Andre Russell, and way back, I'm talking about Shane Warne in 2003. So what is that a player should be careful about so that they don't, unfortunately get trapped in this?
Look, unfortunately, it's very easy to do, unfortunately, because so many of the over-the-counter medications are on the banned list for cricket. So you've got to be just very, very, very aware and just understand that as a professional athlete, you have a responsibility. Ultimately, the responsibility lies with the athlete and with nobody else. The responsibility we have as a franchise is to ensure that they are educated on the practices and the best practices around anti-doping, and educated on the fact that at all international tournaments, you will be subjected to some anti-doping procedures and protocols. So as a franchise and as a medical practitioner, our responsibility is to educate. So then there is no case for ignorance from the player. And then to go the next step is to then educate them about, okay, if you do have certain condition, these are the permitted medications you can take and not these ones. Because unfortunately in India, you can go to the pharmacy and buy pretty well anything over the counter without a prescription. And like I said, it's often a danger, because you go to the pharmacy saying, I've got a sore throat, and the pharmacist will give you this and say, this is fine. But the pharmacist may not necessarily know that you're being subjected to an anti-doping test in 2 days' time and you're going to test positive. So look, it's about awareness and understanding that as a professional sports person in any country, not just in India, it is ultimately your responsibility to know the guidelines. And if you're in any doubt, I say before you put anything in your mouth that's not natural, please call me. And I will tell you whether it's permitted or not, because I have access to the database, as do the players, but I can sort of second vet it for them. So look, we just have to work as a team, make sure that we're educating the player, and that also that, like I said before, there's a constant communication source for that player to access should they have an inquiry about something like medication, what to take and what not to take.
This is for all cricketers who are watching this show, that how important it is that you need to be responsible and be very careful, or call your physiotherapist before taking any medication, unless you want to get into trouble.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. And don't be afraid to second guess and take a second opinion on anything, because ultimately the buck is going to stop with you as the athlete, despite what your trainer or your physio or your doctor has said that, oh, it's okay. If it's not okay, you're the one that has to face the consequences. So just remember that, and I think that's the biggest deterrent in itself, that, the penalties are very severe. The penalties are very severe now. And so let's just be mindful of the fact that we need to keep up the education side. The player needs to keep up the awareness side.
So what would you recommend to players to be fit in this COVID period, where there's hardly any cricket? Just for yesterday, one test cricket just started, but there's very rarely any cricket happening. So how does a player keep himself fit in this pandemic period? Yeah,
look, unfortunately for a lot of the Indian players, they're probably in a worse position because of the severity of the lockdown, but also the space constraints given where most of us live, apartment buildings, not allowed outside, not allowed onto the road, not allowed to parks and gardens. Whereas our overseas players have been a lot more fortunate because they've got access to parks, their own bigger gardens, where they can do a lot more physical training. But then again, we've also become very good at creating and being creative and adaptive within the spaces that we've got. So part of our, responsibility is to set programs that they can work with within the constraints of their building or their home. So I think we've got the physical reasonably well covered. It just means that once we get a time frame from what we call the transition time frame from end of lockdown to the next tournament, how effectively we use that time, because that's the time that is critical, because that's where you develop the skills, what we call the physical skills, are going to make you durable and protect you from injury. And the biggest injury precursor we have in modern day cricket is high-speed running effort. So in the fast forms of the game, like T20 and 50 over cricket, where there's a lot of high-speed running, if you're not prepared for that adequately, then you will break down. Hamstring, calf, quadricep injuries. And we're seeing, I've been looking at the data from Australian Rules Football, NRL, EPL, that have gone back after a fairly short transition period from lockdown to play. And the number of soft tissue injuries in the lower limb is extremely high. And that's purely from lack of high-speed running preparation. So we've got to get smart around that, and just making sure that we use this period during lockdown for our players to get their foundation skills in place, to build the foundation properly, which is often the part of cricket that we don't have time to do because we're always playing, practicing, training, traveling. Now we've got time. I said before, time was an athlete's best most valuable ingredient, they've now got time to work on these other aspects of their game, to get all their stability in place, to get their balance, coordination, flexibility, mobility, agility, all these plyometrics, all these things in place. Build the foundations, the building blocks, so that when we transition back to on field and outside, they've got a lovely foundation to build their speed, their endurance, their speed endurance, etc. onto. So that's critical. The other area they need to work on, I think, is really, really important, is the mental side of the game. And this is a great opportunity. We're all being tested mentally. We're all being taken out of our comfort zones. Greg Chappell, in a talk that we did the other day, was talking about the best players in the world are those that come out of their, or constantly take themselves out of their comfort zones and challenge themselves. So this is a great opportunity to do that. We're all in a very uncomfortable place. So we've got to use this time and develop strategies to overcome that now. And that's going to help us as cricketers and people in the post-COVID world as well. So work on these mental strategies with our players. And I think it's a lovely opportunity to get back with families, to create bonds, to strengthen relationships, but also be creative in other domains. And I've talked, a lot of our players are finding themselves being creative. They're taking up music, they're playing guitars, they're finding other ways to relax and switch off from cricket. In the kitchen, another area where they can be creative. A lot of them have gone in and been cooking, taking control over that side of their life. And then finally, I think the most important thing is the whole nutrition equation. So this is a wonderful opportunity to work on the nutrition and diet disciplines of our players, about best practices. Because not only is it going to benefit you now and build your immunity for COVID, for resisting COVID, but it's also going to give you the best practices going forward as a cricketer or an athlete or a person post-COVID as well. So this is a lovely opportunity to change and a lovely opportunity to reboot, rethink, and reprogram ourselves for good practices that are going to give us the best opportunity to be the best people and the best sports people in the post-COVID world.
Very well said, John. Now, one important question for a lot of youngsters: what separates Virat Kohli from the rest, that he is so fit, and how he can score tons of runs and be still fit till the end of the game or the end of the series?
Look, I think Virat was one of those. I talked earlier about the people that sort of embraced, saw that fitness was a non-negotiable in terms of reaching the top and challenging the best in the world. So he saw, again, about combining this fitness. He sat in that dressing room, as I've been told, in Bangalore 2013 or whenever it was, and looked around that dressing room and said, look, I'm as good a player as all these guys in here. The AB de Villiers and all the other guys in that dressing room. He said, I'm as good as them, but why am I not as good as them in performance? And he looked at himself in the mirror, and he was a bit overweight back then. He was a bit chubby, and he said, all right, I'm going to change that side of my game. So he embraced fitness. And he made it non-negotiable for Indian cricket when he got to a position to do so, which love him or hate him, I think is what has created that environment to say that it is a non-negotiable. And if you want to be part of this team, you've got to embrace fitness as well, and take that back at a much younger age and start embracing it at a younger age. So I think that's his legacy, is going to be that we need to all look at our own fitness platform. What works for him may not work for someone else. Some of his dietary practices are definitely not going to work for some others. And long-term may not necessarily work for him either, but we'll see on that front. But in terms of the actual training, the discipline around the concepts of strength and speed and power, he's said that, in the modern game of cricket, particularly in the shorter form, without it, you're not going to survive. You won't survive either in this team or in the majority of other teams now, because again, it's a non-negotiable and everybody else is embracing it. So we have to as well. So I think it's more the concept of fitness as a whole that he's brought, particularly to Indian, I'm not just going to say Indian cricket, but Indian sport, that it is a side of the Indian sports person that has to be addressed. If we want to compete with the best in the world on an international stage in any sport, we've got to put the technical together, with the fitness together. So what I was preaching 15 years ago, I think we're now starting to see that to be successful, we're going to have to do that.
Well, we've had a very interesting chat with one of the coolest physiotherapists in town, John Gloster. Now I'm going to ask him some quick fire questions and try and put him on the spot. Let's see how he can handle them. My first question, you said you worked under 4 captains when you were with the Indian team. You mentioned about Saurav, you mentioned about Anil, you mentioned about Dravid, you mentioned about MS. Give me one captain you want to play under.
If I was a player,
yes,
probably MS. Yeah, probably MS. Yeah. Just because, like I said, I think he combines the great gifts of all the others.
Sachin Tendulkar, Ricky Ponting, Brian Lara, according to you, who was the best test player?
Geez, you got to take your hat off to Sachin purely for the longevity in the game. Anybody who has spent 10 years in international cricket knows how hard it is. Anybody who's spent 15 years in international cricket knows how hard it is to stay at the top of the game. To have somebody stay in the game for 22 years at the top of their game in India with the pressures that Sachin is under, I think you've got to put Sachin right up there. In terms of success and bringing success to a team, I think Ricky would probably be next for me. And then for flair and the beautiful flamboyance, then obviously Brian Lara. But Sachin probably because of everything else that he had to put up with in India to stay at the top of his game and succeed amongst, tremendous odds, really.
Okay. So you've given very good things about all 3 players, but I'm going to pick Sachin as your answer.
Given the odds, I think so, yeah.
Okay. Your favorite Indian food, a Gujarati thali or a non-vegetarian food, biryani?
Look, honestly, I think
Wife is watching this
which part of India, it could be north, could be south, and the food is so diverse and so different. If I'm up north, then obviously it's going to be, probably a lal mas or a really good pork makhani or something, or dal makhani. If I'm down south, then it's going to be a lovely Kerala fish stew. If I'm in Gujarat, it's probably going to be a good bindi dish, a vegetarian dish. Baroda, if I'm in Baroda at the Pathan's house, then there's going to be a biryani in there somewhere. So look, I think we're just so lucky across India that the diversity of foods is immense. So you can enjoy and have your favorite dishes from probably 10 or 12 different regions of the country and still be not satisfied, to be perfectly honest.
All right. Rajasthan Royals, you had Shane Warne, you had Graham Smith, you had Ajinkya Rahane, you had Steven Smith, one captain for Rajasthan Royals you feel should be there, or you would like to have for Rajasthan Royals. Maybe I might have
you left out Rahul Dravid there.
Yes, I just left out Rahul Dravid.
Yeah.
One.
Pure genius has to be Shane Warne. I mean, he's just a pure genius. And the way he read that format of the game, again, very early on, nobody really knew much about that game. The way he read the game and the way he reads people and players is absolutely unbelievable. I've sat next to him in the dugout and he'll tell you exactly what the batsman's going to do next ball. And sure enough, they do it. I said, how do you know that? He said, because I read people better than anyone else. And that's why he's one of the best poker players in the world. Why he captains the Australian World Poker Team. I mean, because he reads players. He said every batsman will tell you what they're going to do next if you know what you're looking for. And he certainly knew what he was looking for. So probably Shane Warne. And pure, just you cross that boundary line. I don't care what you do off the field, but you cross that boundary line and you don't give absolutely 100% of every single thing you've got, then you're not going to stay on that field. He's just, everything he believed in happened on the field. That was it.
If you had to describe Mumbai in one word.
Mad. It's a mad city. And that's good mad. That's good. That's good mad. That's crazy mad. That's madness. But in 2 words, organized chaos. because stuff just happens. You know what I mean? It just happens. And if you try and put a system sometimes and a structure for things like a city like Mumbai, it just doesn't happen. You get what I mean? So organized chaos would be 2 words, and if it was 1 word, it'd be mad. But you know, it's a city that's so dynamic and changed so much in the 15 years that I've been here that, you know, come back to me in a week's time and it's probably going to be a different word, you know. So it's so dynamic.
You are an Australian citizen.
Yep.
You've been working in India. A World Cup final going on between India and Australia. Which team you would like it to win?
Yeah, I do get asked this question a lot. And for me, it comes down to the people that I know within each team. I've given up following individual teams because of the nature of the game that you and I have been involved in. You have intimate relationships with every team with probably 4 or 5 or 6 different players. So you don't want, you know, this team to win because then all these players that you know really, really well at a personal level will be upset. So I tend to just hope and pray that the people that I know and that I've worked with and I'm associated with in each of the teams does really, really well. And then I'm happy. To be perfectly honest, then I'm happy. And I think you understand that as well a little bit, in that you've formed so many relationships with so many wonderful players over the years through your association that you get torn. You really do get torn. You know, I'm watching this India, you know, West Indies side now. You know, I know quite a few of the West Indies boys, but half of our Rajasthan Royals team are there. So I want them all to do really well as individuals. But at the end of the day, I'm not that fussed about the result, to be perfectly honest.
Your best franchise team, Rajasthan Royals or Delhi Bulls? Okay, one is T10, one is T20.
Yeah, look, probably, I mean, I've had a relationship for you know, 15, 12 years with Rajasthan. There's always going to be that, you know, but the thing that I've loved and appreciated about the T10 and particularly Delhi Bulls was the fact they've embraced something new and they've made it work. And they've made it work very, very successfully. And not just made it work as a format, a different format in the game. They've made it work for the players. Because the ultimate feedback that you want to hear is, did the players enjoy it or not? And every single player that I've asked about that T10 format said they love it. So at the end of the day, that's probably all that matters. If the feedback from the players is consistent and it's positive, then, you know, you're on a winner. So for me, I love and I respect both yourself and the franchise Delhi Bulls because of the way you embraced and took on a new format and made it work for the format of cricket and for the players. But from the perspective of a relationship that I've had for a long period of time, then Rajasthan is obviously right at the top as well. So, you know, that's a tough question. But, you know, but again, it comes down to a lot of the individuals who are in those teams as well that you then associate strongly and closely with as well.
If you are given a job to again work with the Indian cricket team, would you take that?
At a professional level, I'd love to, yeah. But it's so difficult at a personal level because you are constantly traveling. That's why I gave it up in the first place, is because for the previous year leading up to my wedding in 2008, I think I saw my fiance for 6 weeks in the whole year. Because that year we had Bangladesh tour, World Cup tour, South Africa, Australia, England, home series, World Cup again in South Africa, and then back to Australia again. So to be a full-time physio with an international team now is really a 9 or 10 months per year commitment full-time. And so it's very difficult to operate at a personal level with that level of commitment outside of your home country. If, you know, for example, you know, India is now my home country, but for somebody to come in and do that job from outside is very, very difficult. So yeah, it's a tough gig, but professionally, absolutely, because again, you're at the pinnacle of the sport. But the beauty about being associated with the T10s of the world and the IPLs in the world is that you're still associated with the best players in the world in the fastest moving format of cricket in the world. So that's my trade-off, is that I still see that I'm involved with the best in the world because of the players and the franchises that I work with. So I'm getting, you know, much comfort out of that, having not been, you know, or able to sort of be involved at a more complete full-time level.
John, you have been absolutely fantastic. I can assure you, you can be a diplomat after you retire from the physiotherapist. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure our listeners, the cricketers who will go through the show or view the show will enjoy every moment of it. You have a good time. Take care of yourselves, your family. Stay blessed.
Thank you, Anis, and look, thank you again. And I love interacting with you because not just because your enthusiasm, but because I look behind you and I see what cricket genuinely means to you. You can see it on, behind you on that shelf, and also because I know you as a person, but I also know what you've done to promote cricket in the region where you are, and we are forever grateful for that, as well as promoting Indian cricket into that region also, and embracing global cricket under your wing. So, a big thank you to you as well, and I consider you a close friend, and I consider you a wonderful ambassador for cricket worldwide as well.
Appreciate your kind words, John. Go well.